दे दिए वो
आ गया।
चलो म्यूट कर दो।
हाँ कर दो। Okay, let me just make sure. All right, everyone. I'm going to unmute you guys one by one and let me know. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, now we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Because I had it joined by audio, but now you guys should be able to hear me. Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, everyone. I already did the beginning without realizing that you guys weren't hearing me. So let me go ahead. Let me go ahead and mute everybody so that we don't mute and mute. Okay, everybody should now be able to hear me. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Jazakallah khair for joining in. Hopefully we can get started. Inshallah, what we've been talking about, I'm going to, in the last 2 or 3 lectures, what we have been talking about is the Quran and the importance of reading and reciting and understanding and acting upon the Quran. So the first 2 lectures in this 3 series of lectures that I had given, the first lecture was how to read the Quran and how to ponder its meaning and how to think about what the Quran is saying and to actually ponder, think about, and reflect upon what the Quran is saying. Now, as part of that, we spoke about how to interact with the Quran in the sense that if the Quran is asking a question, you should be asking that question for yourself. If the Quran is addressing an individual, or if the Quran is raising a concern or asking for a question or asking for ponderance, you should read it as if it is addressing you directly. Meaning the Quran is not revealed for some other person. Don't read it as if this book is for someone else. It really doesn't apply to me. No, you should be reading the Quran as if it was actually revealed for you, which is a fact, which is truth. The Quran, the reason the Quran was revealed was for the guidance and for the benefit of mankind, and you are part of mankind. So whenever you're reading the Quran, number 1, think about and ponder the meaning of the Quran. Number 2, if the Quran is asking a question or as asking you to ponder on something, go ahead and ask that question for yourself, ponder on that yourself, think about it yourself. And if the Quran is pointing you toward a particular topic or a particular subject, you should be investigating that subject, finding out about that subject. If the Quran is asking about rain, do you know about the water cycle? If the Quran is asking about the heavens, have you read a little bit about astronomy? So investigate, think, ponder what the Quran is asking you. That was the first lecture. The second lecture that we did in this series of lectures that we did was how to act upon and how to actually actively engage in the Quran and how to do and act upon what the Quran is saying. Indeed, seldom a page will go by in which the Quran does not ask or does not tell you in a hypothetical or rhetorical manner. For example, have you not seen the heavens and the earth? Now, what does that mean? You can, just think about sitting in your chair about the heavens or the earth, or you can go ahead, go outside, go buy a pair of binoculars or buy a telescope and actually look at the heavens and see what they're all about. If the Quran asks you to ponder over the creation of the heavens and says, what do you think? You think these heavens are easier to create, or do you think you are harder to create? Which do you think is easier or harder to create? But Allah or God is able to create everything. He created the heavens, He created you, when in fact you're a lot easier to create. So you don't think we could do it again? You don't think we could raise you again, when in fact creating the heavens is a lot harder? But to God, both things are simpler. But if you were to read these verses from the Quran, but you never truly got out a binocular or got out a telescope and actually looked at the heavens and see what the heavens are like, you're not really going to know. Because until you look at the heavens and see how magnificent the stars are, how big the stars are, how enormous the galaxies are, and how enormous the rest of this creation is, and comparatively how little this earth is, it's like a speck of dust in a desert, or a drop of water in an ocean. It's almost completely insignificant compared to the rest of the visible universe. Forget about what we don't see. So when the Quran asks you to do something, for example, in other places, the Quran might ask you to, have they not traveled and seen the ruins of the people that came before them? If the Quran asks you to do that, what should you be doing? Should you be thinking about what the Quran is asking, or should you be traveling? Meaning, go ahead, go find yourself a good, decent travel agent, go to Rome, go take a vacation in Rome and take a look at what happened to the greatest, the most powerful nations that came before you. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran mentions over and over again that all great nations, one after the other, as they were gone, as they were gone before you, if you think you're grandiose, if you think you're awesome, eventually you will return to the same dust and same ruin as those people before you return. So remember, the time you have on this earth is limited. So how can you really ponder that? Would you just sit in your room and think about it? Or is there a better way? Should you be traveling? Go look at Rome, go to Pakistan and go to Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, go to other places where there have been many old civilizations that have been discovered, and see what happened. The people who used to live there are no longer there. And just like that, once upon a time, you won't be there as well. If the Quran is asking you to ponder and think about how the vegetation is raised, now, should you be sitting in a room? Or, well, the funny thing is, I just bought myself a bunch of lawnmower and lawn mowing equipment. I'm going to go start taking care of my own lawn now. Hopefully, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give me a reward for it. Why? Because I'm going to be trying to see what it's like to raise plants, what it's like to take care of grass. If the Quran is asking you, hey, it is Allah who sent the rain from the heavens, and it is He who causes the vegetation to grow up from the earth, go ahead, take up gardening. See what it's like. See what it takes to bring up something from the earth, and see what it likes to water it, and see what it's like and how hard it is, and all the benefits we talked about in the previous two talks. But what are we going to talk about today? Today we're going to talk, in the first lecture we talked about reading and pondering the Quran. In the second lecture we talked about reading, pondering, and acting upon the Quran, acting upon what the Quran is asking us to do. But on today's agenda, I'm going to talk about the third method of reading the Quran. And what is the third method of reading the Quran? Which is pure and simple recitation of the Quran. Now, what is meant by that? In the sense that when you are reciting the Quran, simply just focusing on the words, and not so much in the sense that you are not focusing on the meaning, but you are making entirely sure that you're giving the recitation of the Quran its dues. Now, what does that mean? It means that you are pronouncing the letters correctly. It means that you are not making the mistakes of the recitations, and you are correcting yourself constantly, and you're beautifying your recitation. So that's on the agenda today. We talked about how to ponder the Quran, then we talked about how to act upon the Quran. Today we're going to talk a little bit about how to simply, or in a manner, just only focus on reciting the Quran, and what are some of the challenges and pitfalls you're likely to face, and why this is an important thing that you should be pursuing. Now, I'm going to pick on the India and Pakistani culture. The Indo-Pak culture has a lot of emphasis and places a lot of emphasis on the recitation of the Quran. But a almost opposite force, which it's really quite unfortunate, is that people don't have place as much emphasis or give as much importance to the actual pronunciation. Meaning, in the Indo-Pak subcontinent, they recite the Quran way too fast, or they ignore and they do not give the letters or the pronunciation of letters they're given due, or they are actually actively making, because of the not giving dues of the letters and the pronunciations, they're making major or minor mistakes in the Quran, which means that if they're reciting the Quran without correcting themselves in these pronunciations, without correcting themselves in these, they are actually either reducing the beauty of the Quran, or they could be making major and minor mistakes. Now, I should have split the order. They could have be making minor or even major mistakes in the Quran. Now, what is meant by that? I'll give you a couple of examples. In the Arabic language, there are two letters. There's a letter that is called a qaf, and there's a letter that is called a kaf. A qaf and a kaf. In the Arabic language, if you were to say qalb with a qaf, with the two dots, qalb means heart. Whereas in the Arabic language, if you were to say kalb with a kaf, which is without the two dots, then that means dog. Now, if you mix those two letters up, and which I've sorry to say, I know a lot of my listeners are from the Indo-Pak subcontinent, but when reciting it fast, people don't differentiate between these two letters. They say kalb, 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 and it's very difficult for a listener or even for the reciter to actually differentiate between the qalb and the kalb. Qalb and kalb. If these two aren't differentiated, then you could turn the meaning of qalb, which means heart, into kalb, which means dog. So that is a major mistake in the Quran, even though it's just a tiny little inflection of a throat versus tongue. It's qalb, which is heart, or kalb, which is kaf. That tiny inflection can, number one, reduce the beauty of the Quran, and number two, cause a minor or even a major mistake in meaning to occur in the Quran. So not only can you reduce or lose the beauty of the Quran, but you could be making major or minor mistakes in the Quran. This is why we must learn not only to recite the Quran, but also to recite it with correct and proper pronunciations, giving each and every letter and each and every verse its due rights. Now, what is meant by that? Now, for most of my listeners, there might be adult listeners, there might be kid listeners, which is fine. Alhamdulillah, I don't mind either way. But to a lot of you, this might sound like I'm giving you advice, or to the adults especially, that I'm asking you to go back to your beginning. Literally going back to your beginning. If you remember, once upon a time when you were children, if your parents definitely, most Muslims do, your parents taught you alif ba ta from the beginning. And that is where I'm asking you to begin one more time. Not for the reason that I don't think you know how, but for the reason that if you don't make this a constant habit of learning to recite the Quran and giving the pronunciation its due rights of the Quran, you will continue to make the mistakes that have been ingrained in you for quite some time. And you are missing out. Now remember, the Quran was revealed to an adult, and all the people who accepted Islam after listening to the Quran, with some minor exceptions, were who? Were adults. They were the ones, the Sahaba were adults. All of them were adults. They're the ones who learned and listened to the Quran and learned to recite it and pondered its meaning. I want you to stop thinking that what the benefit or the lecture that I'm giving is addressed to children only. No, it is addressed to the adults as well. This is for you. If you think about it, Who was the Quran revealed among and revealed to? It was revealed to our Prophet Muhammad SAW, who was an adult at the time. And the people who listened to it, memorized it, and taught it to others were who? They were adults. So it is a request that I'm making for the adults, that please do learn to recite the Quran correctly and try to attempt to engage in reciting the Quran correctly. And inshallah, today I will give you some pointers. This lecture is almost going to be a plug for my other YouTube channel. I hope everybody who is listening is already subscribed to it. But if you're not, I highly recommend you subscribe to it. And in which I go from start to finish, very basic, and I move it on up one at a time, how to recite the Quran and how to correct your recitation correctly. So what are some of the benefits of reciting the Quran as it is recited by the Arabs, or as it was recited by the Arabs? Now, what do I mean by that? Because the Quran was revealed in the in the Arabic language to our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we should be attempting to emulate. Not all Arabs, by the way, good caveat, not all Arabs pronounce the Quran correctly. Some of them are really bad at pronunciation of the Quran. But remember, the people who know and who are absolutely correctly able to recite the Quran, unfortunately, are mostly Arabs. Because of this culture of reciting the Quran at way too much speed in the Indo-Pak subcontinent, this art or this benefit, this beauty of the Quran is being lost in the Indo-Pak subcontinent. So what are some of the benefits? What are some of the benefits you can derive by attempting, or at least trying to recite the Quran with correct pronunciation, with correct recitation? Number one, and this is one of the greatest benefits, is that you will experience, not just hear it from some hypothetical scenario or from somebody else. You will experience for yourself why this book is so beautiful, right? As a Muslim, I used to be in place where most of my listeners are now. I used to say, oh yeah, the Quran is beautiful. When you recite it, it's very beautiful. But I did not experience it for myself, how beautiful the Quran is. I could only hear it, and there is no harm in actually hearing it from good reciters such as Sheikh Sudais, Sheikh Mishari, and Sheikh Hudayfi and others, Sheikh Husari. All these shuyukh who recite the Quran, they recite it very, very beautifully, and you can hear it. But if you engage in the Quran and try to recite this book yourself, you will see why it is beautiful. It won't be hypothetical anymore. You will experience it for yourself. There is a mountain of difference between you seeing someone do something and you doing it yourself. If you want to learn to swim, you can go and watch somebody else swim, or you can learn to do it yourself. There is going to be a mountain of difference between watching someone swim or actually swimming. There is a tremendous amount of difference. There's a great difference between listening to someone recite the Quran and actually attempting to beautify your own recitation. You will know, you will experience, you will see the beauty of the Quran. If somebody says, well, why is the Quran beautiful? You will know it. You will experience it for yourself. Number two, and this is a secular benefit and it's going to permeate through the rest of your life. I can guarantee you this is going to permeate through the rest of your life. Your attention to detail will improve and your endurance will improve. Now, what do I mean by that? Whenever we're doing any task of importance, anything that is important, or anything that requires a lot of work, these two things are key. Number one, you have to have attention to detail. You cannot be missing the minor things. And number two, you have to have endurance. Now, what is meant by endurance? You have to have the will to continue when it feels like you are not improving. When it comes to any task, whether it's the kids are listening or whether the adults are listening, anything that is worth doing, you will experience this. whether it's recitation of the Quran or whether it's doing anything else, whether trying to find a job, whether trying to get into college or study for a test, or doing anything. These two things are going to be key. Your attention to detail, making sure you don't ignore the minor things, and your endurance, making sure that you have the strength of will, the strength of character, and the willpower to keep doing it over and over and over again, despite the fact that perhaps you don't see the benefits immediately. This is one benefit that you will see permeate through the rest of your life if you make a commitment, if you try to recite the Quran as it deserves to be recited. Your attention to detail will increase, your endurance will increase. Number 3, you will find a coolness of heart and calmness of mind that you have never, ever experienced before. And I can tell you this from personal experience. I did not know what it was like, what the Quran was like until, or how beautiful it is, until I actually actively attempted to recite the Quran as it deserves to be recited. What do I mean by that? Once I started to hear, and once I started to know what the Quran is like, and once I started to recite it as it deserves to be recited, I have literally lulled babies to sleep with the Quran when I have recited it to them. I used to do it to my nephew. I used to do it to Bilal, my cousin. I used to do it to Aiza when she was a baby. And I can still do it today. And not just for others, but when I'm reciting, the recitation of the Quran is so beautiful. It is so beautiful that once you hear it, and once you are actively reciting and learning how to do it, and once you are doing it correctly, you will feel a calmness, a pleasantness of mind, of serenity, of heart that you have never experienced before. And I cannot describe it. I'm sorry, I can't. Why? You have to experience it for yourself. And I hope once my lecture is over, once this is over, you are going to at least attempt to start. You don't have to become a perfect reciter of the Quran in one day. It's just going to take time. You are going to need endurance. You're going to need attention to detail. But one of the greatest benefit of this is just for your own self. You will be a calm, cool, collected, serene person, a happy person. Because that's what the Quran is. It is medicine for the hearts of people. It is healing for people who are in distress. This is something you will experience for yourself. And finally, one of the greatest benefits is you will no longer be making the mistakes that the people in the Indo-Pak subcontinent are rather prone to making when reciting the Quran. Why do I say the Indo-Pak subcontinent? I'm sure non-Indo-Pak subcontinent people might be listening to this lecture later on. But the reason I say that is until I started to give attention to the details of the recitation of the Quran, I did not know how wrong I was reciting the Quran and what the major and minor mistakes I and other fellow Indo-Indian and Pakistanis make when reciting the Quran. You will not be making these mistakes anymore. And you will personally benefit. Your reward with Allah will increase because you will no longer be making these mistakes, inshallah. So these are some of the benefits of reciting the Quran. Now, for the remainder of the lecture, I will quickly go through. Now, for the remainder of the lecture, I will quickly go through two things. Number one, I will go through a quick introduction of my other channel. I hope everybody who's listening subscribe to that channel. And if you have already subscribed, go back and watch the videos that I have created there. And after I give you a quick introduction of that channel, I will then give you a quick lesson that I gave in that channel, which is just beginning with the Arabic alphabet. Inshallah, hopefully, you know what, let me check my time. How am I doing on time? Okay, I'm already halfway through. So I may not be able to get through everything, but hopefully I will get through most of it. Okay. Okay. So this is an agenda that I did for that channel. The agenda for that channel, and if you want, and the way that you should be looking for once you're done with this video, go ahead, subscribe to that channel. The channel is called Learn to Recite the Quran Lessons in English. And the purpose of this agenda is I'm going to tell you who those videos are for that I've done, how those videos are organized, the format of each of those videos, how I have created self-tests, what is meant by self-test, and I will give you why I have made the learning of the recitation of the Quran in very simple, small pieces, and I have made it a very academic and studious exercise. Now, what do I mean by that? Just like you do in a school, what do? You learn, you do, and then you test. Okay? That's the way I have organized these videos in that lecture as well. Or I'm sorry, in that channel as well. Who is the primary audience for that other channel that I'm going? Those videos are for English speakers, and they are in the English language. However, other people who may not be fluent in English can definitely derive benefit from these videos, but this is for people like you who are my listeners, mostly people who are looking for lessons in basic recitations of the Quran and basic reading of the Quranic Arabic. Now, what do I mean by that? Most of you who are listening, some of the contrast to that channel is you have been learning to, or you have learned to recite the Quran in the Majidi script. The Indian and Pakistani script that you guys are used to of Arabic being written in is called the Majidi script. And the way that I've done this other channel, Learn to Recite the Quran Lessons in English, is that I have done it for people I have done it for people who do not know the Uthmani script, which is a different script. It is written slightly differently, but it is tremendously more beneficial for people who are looking to recite the Quran and with correct recitation and pronunciation while keeping in mind and while honoring the rules of recitation. Okay? So what is the format of those videos? The video format of those videos is divided into sections and lessons. Each lesson has a review of the previous lesson. It has warm-ups. It has lesson contents and instructions. And after the instruction, there is going to be some recitation and exercise. And at the end of each of those lessons, there is a self-test. And with the self-test, from start to finish, it will tell you what the previous lesson was, how you can warm up your tongue, nose, throat, chest, and mouth to recite the Quran. Then we're going to go into lesson content, and then we're going to do some recitation. And finally, you're going to take a self-test. Don't be worried about what is meant by self-test. Be sure to take the self-test from that channel, because it will tell you how proficient you are in that particular lesson. And just make sure that you do not move until you have at least acceptable proficiency in that lesson. Okay. Now, when I did this particular, let me see if I can quickly skip through this. The self-tests are organized such that you will need to recite, and remember this, even though I'm asking you to learn to recite the Quran, at the end of the day, you cannot do it alone. And I can guarantee you cannot do it alone. You have to have someone listen to your recitation and then correct them. Now, these are some of the places where you can find a tester who will listen to you, or you can find someone who will listen to you or conduct your self-tests. You can find someone at your local masjid, and trust me, there are people who would be willing to do this for you. You can find people online, you can pay people online to do this for you, but you have to make sure that the person you are paying or the person who is listening to you actively knows or actively has an ijazah and the recitation of the Quran. And inshallah, what I mean by ijazah, we will discuss in a future video, inshallah. And finally, you can look towards your friends and family. If you have a friend or if you have a family member who knows how to recite the Quran, who has an ijazah and a recitation of the Quran, make sure you find that person, you ask them that you would like to recite from them. And finally, we can skip the rest of the bullet points. There are percentages assigned to the self-tests. 90% or more is excellent, which is what you should be gearing towards, what you should be attempting towards. 80% or more is acceptable. 70% or more is poor, whereas less than 70% is unacceptable. Okay? Now, in order to learn to recite the Quran, what are you going to need? You're going to need these are basically almost like preparing yourself for a class. You're going to need a Quran and the Uthmani script. For most of you who are listening, you probably have the Quran at your house in the Majidi script, right? You probably definitely have it in the Indian Pakistani script, which is called the Majidi script, okay? That script is different from the Uthmani script. It is written slightly differently. Its notations are slightly different. And you will know what I mean when you purchase an Uthmani script. Number one, ask a friend. You can ask a friend, somebody who knows where to find a Uthmani script, or any local masjid. If you go to a local masjid and you say, I would like to get a Quran in the Uthmani script, most local masajid will give you a Quran in the Uthmani script for free. The blue Quran that is imported from Saudi Arabia and the green Quran, which is slightly smaller, is also imported from Saudi Arabia. They're both written in the Uthmani script, and they're both available in most American masajid for free. Or finally, you can just Google the term free Quran, and you can download the PDF version of the Uthmani script yourself. I don't recommend doing that because if it's in your phone or if it's in your iPad, it seldom gets read. But if it's in a book and if it's accessible, if it's within two covers and it's accessible to you, you are more likely to pick it up. So I highly recommend you find yourself a Quran in the Uthmani script. And finally, keep a folder for printouts, notes, and self-tests, and become a student of this knowledge. Become a learner of this knowledge. Okay? You have to try to make a commitment for yourself that I am going to try to learn this for myself. And basically, during this journey, you're going to need a notebook where you're going to place your printouts, where you're going to place your notes, where you're going to place your self-tests, etc. So keep that information with you. And finally, you will need a willingness to learn. A willingness to learn. And this, I'm asking for more from the adults than the children. Why? Because the children, I have seen, they already have a extreme curiosity and a tremendous penchant for learning, and I love them for it. But the reason I'm specifically addressing the adults, I know life is busy. I know you are busy. I know life's hard. But please switch your mindset to a willingness to learn the Quran. A willingness to learn the Quran in the sense that you are the one that the Quran is revealed for. You are the one that you should be attempting to learn to recite it correctly. It is meant for you. It is not meant for just for your children. It is definitely meant for your children, but it is not just meant for your children. It is meant for you. It is a lifelong journey that you have to take on. So inshallah, I hope that the adults who are listening to this develop a willingness to learn. Not just, you listen to this lecture and you just turn this off and you don't worry about it anymore. No, subscribe to my channel, watch those videos, find yourself a local person in your local masjid, attempt to recite. Please engage with the Quran so that you know, or so that you learn how to recite it properly and correctly. And for any additional help, oh, you know what? That's it for my that particular lesson. Actually, you know what? We're at 11:37 anyway, and I was gonna do one more lesson, but the lesson is going to take a little bit more time than I had anticipated. So I am going to end it here. It's going to be a short lecture, it's about half hour to 40 minutes. So, Jazakallah khair everyone. Subhanak Allahumma wa bihamdika wa ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. I am going to open the lines for questions. I'm going to unmute everybody. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, go ahead.
I'm coming.
Okay. By the way, who is on the line? Can you introduce yourselves? I see a bunch of iPhones. I see an SGH137M. I don't know who everybody is. So if you can, if anybody.
Yeah, I'm driving.
Okay. ठीक है, Dad. Don't worry about it.
वैसे अस्सलाम वालेकुम, मैं हूँ डैब।
वालेकुम सलाम। आप अपने आईफोन से ज्वाइन किया? कहाँ से ज्वाइन किया?
मैंने उसी फोन सैमसंग से करा है बेटा।
SGH। अच्छा, ये SGH मुझे लग रहा है ये सैमसंग आपका है। ठीक है।
अच्छा, ठीक है,
अच्छी बात
मेरे
है।
ख्याल से मैं अपने आईडी से नहीं हुई, वो बस मुझे ये था कि लेक्चर जा रहा है तो मैं पहले साइन इन हो जाऊं।
ठीक है। नो प्रॉब्लम। मैं इसी वजह से कहूँ कि आमतौर पे आप अपनी आईडी से साइन इन करते हैं, तो मुझे पता नहीं चलता होता।
जी।
ठीक है। Any questions, any comments from anybody, any concerns? So please don't take this as a criticism of the adults. It's not meant to be. But I do want you to think, I do want you to encourage yourself and think about reciting the Quran and learning the Quran as it is meant to be learned. Number one, the 3 lectures that we talked about. What was the first one? Pondering the Quran and understanding and thinking about its meaning. Number 2, acting upon the Quran and learning and actively participating and actively doing what the Quran asks us to do. If the Quran asks us to pray, we pray. If the Quran asks us to travel the world, we travel the world. If the Quran asks us to look at the heavens, we go outside, we go look at the heavens. And what we talked about, which was the third and final lecture for recitation and understanding of engagement with the Quran, which was just about straight and simple recitation of the Quran. Meaning, in this mode of reading the Quran, what are you focusing on? You're focusing on giving the letters and their pronunciation of the letters their due right and pronouncing them correctly and with full dues, making sure you're not making any major or minor mistakes in the Quran, and making sure you become a student and actively engage in a studious exercise of learning to recite the Quran. And I hope this doesn't rub any adults the wrong way, but it is meant for you. This is actually meant for adults. The Quran was revealed to an adult, and the Quran was learned and transmitted to us by adults. So even though you should be teaching your children, absolutely, I ask you to please make a commitment. Subscribe to my channel. Go find yourself somebody in your local masjid who will listen to you, who will recite, who you can recite to, or find someone online who you can recite to. Go buy yourself an Uthmani mushaf and attempt to recite the Quran correctly, and you will experience all the benefits that we talked about. Jazakallah khair for coming, everyone. Inshallah, we will continue next week. If you have any suggestions for next week's lecture, now is the lecture topic. Now is the time. Unmute yourself. I'm going to give you a few seconds. All right. Well, it looks like nobody had any suggestions. So Jazakallah khair for coming, everyone. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك واشهد ان لا اله الا انت استغفرك واتوب اليك وما علينا الا البلاغ المبين. السلام عليكم ورحمه الله.
वालेकुम अस्सलाम वरहमतुल्लाहि वबरकातुहू।
हाफिज.
السلام عليكم.
وعليكم السلام.